He was obsessed with school shootings in Columbine and eventually carried out a massacre of his own. Arthur Eichlegner was 21 years old when he walked back into the school he once attended, but the person entering that building was very different from the student who left it years ago. Arthur has struggled academically and socially. He repeated the 6th grade and eventually dropped out of Boyd in 2022 without graduating. After leaving, he became increasingly withdrawn. He lived with his mother, was unemployed, and mostly kept to himself. He had even tried to join the Austrian armed forces, but was rejected after he was deemed mentally unfit for military service. And then things took an even darker turn. Arthur became deeply fascinated with school shootings, specifically the Columbine massacre and the people responsible for it. Over time, that fascination stopped being something he consumed online and became something he wanted to recreate. He began planning an attack on his old school. At first, he wanted to use a bomb. Plans for the attack were found later at his home, along with a non-functioning pipe bomb. Eventually, he abandoned that plan and turned towards firearms instead. In April of 2025, he obtained a firearms ownership card and bought a shotgun. The following month, he bought the Glock pistol he would use to carry out the massacre. Then came June 10th, 2025. Around 9:43 that morning, Arthur walked into Boyd carrying his weapons. 14 minutes later, the first shots rang out. For roughly 7 minutes, he moved through the school, opening fire inside classrooms on the 2nd and 3rd floor. Around 40 shots were fired. Before the shooting, Arthur had uploaded a farewell video telling his mom what he was about to do. She eventually saw the video and immediately contacted police, but by then, the attack was already happening. During his rampage, he also called her. 10 people were killed. 9 of them were students between the ages of 14 and 17. A 59-year-old teacher was also critically wounded and later died at the hospital. 11 other people were injured. Then, at 10:07, Arthur returned to a bathroom inside the school and took his own life. In just a couple of minutes, an ordinary school day turned into a nightmare. What he left behind was more than a crime scene. It was a community full of grieving families, traumatized students, and classrooms that would never feel the same again. Austria declared 3 days of national mourning, and the massacre sparked major changes in the country's gun laws. The school itself underwent extensive renovations, including turning the rooms where the shooting took place into memorial spaces. This case today was so heartbreaking and heavy, so I know if I need a hug, you probably do too. So bring it in. With that being said, what do you guys think about this case? Leave your thoughts in the comments below.
This is everything that we know so far about the 3 Kansas City Chiefs fans that were found frozen to death outside of their friend's house. 3 lifelong friends, Ricky, David, Clayton, went to their friend Jordan's house to watch the Chiefs game, and then no one heard or saw them for 2 days. Clayton's fiance went to Jordan's house to look for her fiance, and that's where she found the 3 men frozen in Jordan's backyard. Police went to Jordan's house. He said he had no idea that his friends had been dead in his backyard for 2 days and he had been sleeping the entire time. Jordan also says that none of his friends' loved ones have been trying to connect with him, even though they all said that they had been calling repeatedly, showing up, and one of them was actually banging on Jordan's front door for like 20 minutes. A toxicology report was just released for these 3 men, and they had many illegal substances in their system, including 3 times the lethal amount of fentanyl. Jordan has since gone into rehab, and police says that they do not believe that this is a case of foul play. But the loved ones do not believe this story at all, and they want more answers. I could not find anything if these 3 men were known for using illegal substances, so we're just gonna have to wait to see if more things come out. But it is worth noting that Jordan was a scientist and has been known since high school for enhancing drugs to give to people. And people online are actually saying that he is like the suburban Walter White. If he was just a guy who was like enhancing some drugs at home to give to his friends, why would he give them 3 times the lethal amount of fentanyl? Personally, I think that the explanation of this is super sus, but I guess we're gonna have to wait for more things to come out because the police are like really certain that this is not a case of homicide, so they must have more information than we do. Let me know what you've been thinking about this case and if you want me to continue to update on it in the comments. I just started a second TikTok account where I'm gonna post all things not true crime related, beauty, lifestyle, stuff like that. So if you're interested in seeing more of that from me, it'll be in my bio and also tagged in this video.
Imagine going to the theatre only to find out that while you watched the show, one of the actors stashed a dead body above your head. It was 2010 in California. 26-year-old Daniel Wozniak was living in an apartment complex in Costa Mesa with his fiancée Rachel May Buffett. I didn't know whether it was Buffett or Buffet, like Phoebe Buffet from Friends, but I'm guessing it's Buffett. Daniel was apparently a lovely guy, or so people said. He was an actor, or at least trying to be. He wanted to make it big and make loads of money, but it wasn't exactly going the way he'd planned. He was part of this local community theatre and would always do plays with this one group. Not sure if this is how he met his fiancée, but she was definitely involved with this. Like I said, they were engaged and they'd been planning their big day. Daniel was planning this lavish wedding and honeymoon, however, he was pretty broke. The couple lived near another guy. This was Sam Herr, a 26-year-old war veteran. He seemed to get on really well with Sam, but a casual confession from him would be his demise. Sam confided in Daniel that he had savings of about $62,000. Now, this was from his combat pay. He thought he could trust Daniel with this information. Little did he know Daniel was struggling financially and would be extremely jealous. Daniel hatched a plan. Kill Sam to steal the money, but also kill somebody else to frame Sam for the murder and make it look like Sam had gone on the run. He thought that if he killed somebody and police believed that it was Sam that had killed them and just gone on the run, they wouldn't look for him and he would get away with it. So on the 21st of May that year, Daniel lured Sam to a local theatre, telling him that he needed help moving something heavy. Sam, being a nice guy, decided he would go and help his neighbour, and when he arrived and started to help Daniel, he suddenly got shot. Daniel had shot him in the head. He didn't die straight away. He stumbled and begged for help. Daniel callously shot him again, this time killing him. But the plan wasn't over. Daniel continued. He grabbed Sam's phone and put the next part of the plan in motion. He texts Sam's best friend, Julie Kibushi. She was a beautiful 23-year-old college student who actually regularly tutored Sam. They would always hang out together. He told her, obviously pretending to be Sam, that he needed to speak with her, that he was going through something. Julie, being a really good friend, went straight over to Sam's apartment. Now, unfortunately, Daniel lay in wait. Soon as she arrived and entered the apartment, he shot and killed her too. He staged the crime scene to make out like Julie had been SA'd. Obviously, there was also the trail of text messages which would make Sam look really guilty, despite the fact that Sam was already dead. But Daniel wasn't quite as clever as he thought he was. Soon his whole act would come crashing down. Later that night, Daniel actually went on to perform at his local theatre production of the musical 9. He then went up to the attic, dismembered Sam's body, removing his head, arms and legs, and stuffed his torso into a bag. He kept it there in the attic of that theatre. It wasn't until Sam's dad actually went round to Sam's apartment that he found the body of Julie. He'd just let himself in with the spare key because he hadn't heard off Sam. Julie was lying there, her jeans were round her knees, and somebody had written things onto her. All yours and F you were written on her top. Dad obviously called 911 in a state of sheer panic. Initially, police did believe the staged scene that was there. It made sense that Sam had killed Julie and just gone on the run. However, Daniel was about to make a huge mistake. He approached a 17-year-old guy called Wesley Freelich. They'd acted together in a play, I think. Daniel told him this story about he worked for a bail bonds agency and needed help from this guy to withdraw some money from somebody's account. He even had legit looking paperwork. Now, Wesley, being 17 and kind of trusting what Daniel was saying, did actually do this for him. He withdrew the money from Sam's account. However, he was caught on CCTV, so when police tracked Wesley down and asked him, "What on earth were you doing?" he just told them about what Daniel had told him. This led police straight to Daniel. Turns out that police showed up to Daniel's stag do and arrested him there and then. It was just 2 days prior to his wedding. He finally broke down and confessed everything, and he was sentenced to death. And his fiancée was far from innocent. She was also arrested and charged with accessory after the fact due to lying to police to try and cover Daniel's tracks. She was given just 44 months but was released in 2019 on good behavior. I don't think that they're still together.
Last month, 4 kids were found alive 40 days after their plane crashed in the Amazon rainforest. On May 1st, the 4 kids, who were 13, 9, 4, and 11 months old, were traveling with their mom over the Amazon rainforest. They boarded a Cessna single-engine propeller plane that was carrying a total of 7 people, including the family. As they were flying over Colombia's Amazon rainforest, the plane's engine failed and they disappeared from the radar. More than 100 soldiers with sniffer dogs began an extensive search for the plane, but because of the dense jungle, it would take 2 weeks to find anything. On May 16th, search and rescue found the plane's wreckage, and among the debris, they found the bodies of 3 adults, including the children's mother. But the 4 siblings were missing. After expanding their search, authorities found clues that the children had survived the crash and were alive, so they dropped boxes of food into the jungle in hopes that they would find it. They also used a speaker to blast a message recorded by the children's grandma that told them to stay in one place. Miraculously, on June 9th, more than a month alone in the rainforest, all 4 kids were found alive, less than 2 miles from the crash site. They were then taken to a local hospital to be treated. According to the kids, their mom initially survived the plane crash, but died about 4 days later. They hid in tree trunks to protect themselves from dangerous animals and bugs, and they survived by eating seeds and fruits, all of which they learned from indigenous families as they were all members of the Witoto indigenous group.
This case has become the longest running Amber Alert in Ohio history, but after all these years, we still don't know what happened to Keyshawn Williams. Keyshawn Williams, whose nickname was Key, was 15 years old and living in Cleveland, Ohio, when he disappeared on June 17th, 2023. He was a bright kid and he was going to be a sophomore the next school year. He was a boxer training at Earl B. Turner Recreation Center, and his coach would say that he started boxing 6 months prior and he would never miss a practice. He was extremely dedicated. He enjoyed going to church every Sunday, and he actually worked the front desk there. He is his mother, Sharice Snowden's only child, and he is described as compassionate, funny, and a carefree kid who just loved joking around. On Saturday, June 17th, 2023, he will cook breakfast with his mother in the morning, and then she will braid his hair. That night, he will end up going to a party near Fleet and Gertrude Avenues. His mother called him around 10:30 p.m. asking him to please come home, and he said he would, but he never made it there. He would end up calling his aunt at some point that night, crying and upset, and they have never been able to figure out what he was upset about. When he didn't return home, this was immediately alarming to his mother. He had never been away from her for long, and he was a respectful kid who always listened to his mother, so when she told him to come home, he would come home. And on top of that, he would never miss church. His mother would report him missing, and on June 24th, 7 days after he disappeared, they would issue an Amber Alert for him. At the time, authorities believed that he was in serious danger, and the more information that came in, the more concerned they were. According to investigators, he was at a house party, and he was asked to leave this party. He was seen walking down Gertrude Avenue, where he went to another party on the same street. He got separated from his friends at some point, though. Investigators would later say that a witness came forward and said that they thought that they saw Keyshawn in a black Jeep Cherokee tied up and beaten, and that's why they had issued the Amber Alert. But then later they would say they reviewed surveillance footage and they didn't believe that it was him. His phone would later ping near East 93rd Street and Harris Avenue, which was about 10 minutes from where he was last seen. That is believed to be the last location connected to his phone. Unfortunately, there was not much surveillance footage in the area, and they were never able to successfully track his phone. They've searched homes, abandoned properties, wooded areas, and other locations through Cleveland and Cuyahoga County. They've utilized dogs, drones, helicopters, and many other resources, but they have never found Keyshawn. In December 2023, Cleveland police and the U.S. Marshals searched a wooded area and creek bed near I-77 and Fleet Avenue. Authorities emphasized that it was a search effort, not a rescue, but they didn't find anything. In October 2024, 2 black SUVs were pulled from the Cuyahoga River after investigators believed that they could be connected to his disappearance. Authorities would later determine that the SUVs were not connected to his disappearance, and despite extensive searches and years of investigation, no one has ever been charged in Keyshawn's disappearance. His family continues to search for him, and they believe that if he simply just ran away, that he would have contacted them by now. He talked to them every single day. They were very, very close. He wouldn't just not contact them. Keyshawn would be 19 this December. If you or anybody you know has any information regarding the disappearance of Keyshawn Williams, you can contact the Cleveland Police or the U.S. Marshals. Thank you for listening to Keyshawn's story. Be sure to follow for more true crime. And if you have any case recommendations, feel free to comment, directly message me, or fill out the suggested case form in my link tree in my bio.
This is the last photo that 32-year-old Quaylen Campbell sent to his wife before he was found shot to death. If there's ever a story that needs to go viral, it's this one. At around 1 p.m. on June 2nd of this year, Quaylen texted his wife Talia that he was being held hostage and to call 911. He sent her this photo and his location before he stopped responding. Talia immediately called the police, but the dispatcher seemed to show no sense of urgency, so she drove herself to Quaylen's location, which was about 45 minutes away. When she arrived, the police were still not there, even though it was only a mile from the Colorado Springs Police Department. Once there, she spotted her husband Quaylen slumped over in the driver's seat of his company car, and right next to him was another deceased man with a gun in his lap. Since the police didn't respond to the call, Talia had to be the one to perform CPR on her husband, but he sadly died of a gunshot wound. The Colorado Springs Police Department eventually showed up, but only because of a second phone call from family members reporting the deaths. Authorities have confirmed that the deceased man next to Quaylen was 44-year-old David Carrolls, and the case is being investigated as a murder-suicide. Quaylen didn't know David, but it's believed that David was homeless and that Quaylen was giving him a ride. Once inside the car, David held Quaylen hostage and fatally shot him and then himself. The Colorado Springs Police Department say that they were called to the shooting that day a little after 2 p.m., but phone records show that Talia called 911 nearly an hour earlier at 1:15 p.m. According to attorneys, they are wanting to petition the CSPD to release the audio recordings of the police radio communication to see why exactly nobody responded to the first 911 call. If they had, Quaylen's life could have possibly been saved. Please keep the Campbell family in your thoughts. I've also attached a GoFundMe set up for Quaylen's wife and 2 young kids if you'd like to donate or share.
She was caught making her tamales out of humans. Anabel Gomez Lopez was living in Mexico City and was a very well-known tamale maker. She would often sell her tamales outside of a subway station, but no one really knew what the meat really consisted of. One day, a gas leak had seeped through the walls of her house, which resulted in a horrible smell. This smell was so strong that a neighbor had smelt it, panicked, and called police. When police had arrived to the home, they were met with a gruesome scene. Right there in the living room were the bones of a young woman who had been stripped from her flesh and meat. So the secret ingredient for these tasty tamales were the meat of women. For years, Anabel would prey on young women and lure them back into her home with the promise of food and shelter. Anabel had did this in the first place because one day she had spent all of her money and wasn't able to buy the meat for her tamales. On that day, Anabel had came across a young girl looking for her parents, and she was lost, and she had told her that she could go back to her place and she could call her parents there, but of course Anabel had other sinister plans. Anabel had admitted to doing this to 50 women to use as meat for her tamales. She clearly had no remorse and said that the only reason she got caught was because of that gas leak. Her defense attorney tried to argue that she was mentally ill because she heard a voice in her head telling her to use these women as meat for her tamales. As a result, Anabel was sentenced to 25 years in prison.
So a woman tells police that her husband decided to end his own life because he had surgery for prostate cancer and he was impotent, and he decided he wanted to end his own life and give his wife all of the life insurance money. But she had to stage the scene to make it look like a homicide, because if he took his own life, she would not receive the life insurance. Now, is this really the case, or did she in fact murder him in cold blood? Traverse City, Michigan lives a McDonald family, which includes Dan, his wife Cynthia, and their 2 teenage children, Patrick and Aaron. So Dan is a retired police officer and he works part-time in maintenance, and Cynthia is a freelance writer. December of '98, Patrick is staying at a friend's house and Dan decided to sleep in that morning, and Cynthia and her daughter Erin decided to go shopping that morning. They arrived back home around noon, where they found Dan deceased in his bed from a single gunshot wound to his head. So there was no weapon found near Dan's body, but a few $100s was missing from his wallet. So Cynthia believes that someone had came in and the motive was robbery. But there was no signs of forced entry, and the police thought this was suspicious. So Cynthia decided to change her story and said that her husband ended up taking his own life. So now Cynthia's story is that she went into the bedroom to let Dan know that her and Aaron were about to leave, when she noticed that he had taken his own life, and he left a note saying that he was devastated over his cancer diagnosis and that he was impotent, and he wanted her to have the life insurance money, which was $300,000. Now she had to stage the scene to make it look like a homicide, otherwise she would not get this. But apparently she got rid of that note that he had left. So Cynthia tells the police that she threw Dan's revolver in a nearby field, but they searched everywhere and they could not find it. Now the autopsy showed that Dan still had the bullet in his head, and the entrance wound was on the back side of his head on the left side. Now Cynthia is also a murder mystery writer, and she also made the comment that the police in Michigan aren't smart enough to catch some of these suspects. So the entrance wound was on the back of Dan's head on the left side, but Dan is right-handed, and they found no blood spatter on his hands. Also, his left arm was underneath his body, so it looked like his left arm never moved whatsoever, and there was just a big pool of blood right next to his left arm. Also next to Dan's body, they found a pillow with gunpowder and a bullet hole, so someone had used that as a silencer to muffle the sound. Now, if Dan did this to himself, the only way it was possible is if he had 3 arms. So they ruled this as a homicide, and they believe the motive is money, because Cynthia was spending more than they were bringing in, and she would always buy expensive items. So Dan also had a trust fund for a mentally handicapped relative, and a year before his death, someone had taken out $50,000 from that account, and the bank wanted answers. So thankfully, they did have surveillance, and they could see on the cameras it was Cynthia that was taking that money out. Now, Cynthia's daughter, Erin, she noticed something odd about her mother's behavior that morning of her father's death. She was getting ready in the shower, and her mother was constantly coming in the bathroom checking up on her, and she turned the radio volume up. Then she did hear what sounded like a car backfiring or a loud bang. So they also found forensic textbooks that Cynthia was using for her murder mystery stories, and some of them were titled Body Trauma and Armed and Dangerous. And some of these chapters were titled Accidental Shooting versus Self-Aliving, and also Who Shot Whom. So the motive is money. Dan probably confronted his wife about that missing money, maybe threatened to go to the police, and he was going to take that money and put it back into the trust fund account. And Cynthia did not like that. Now at her trial, her defense, they had a forensic expert saying it's possible that Dan did take his own life. Based on the pillowcase, maybe it got, stuck underneath his arm when he put that firearm up to his head and pulled the trigger, and that's why that happened. Also, there was no GSR test done on his hands, but the medical examiner said there was no need. Even if someone else fired the weapon and he didn't himself, even if they were in close proximity of his body, it still could end up on his hands. But the jury was not buying her story. They found her guilty of first-degree murder, and she was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Now, Cynthia thought because she was reading all these crime and forensic books, she could get away with the most perfect crime, but she forgot to show signs of forced entry. Now, if she would have done that, it's very possible she could have gotten away with this, and this could have been some random home invasion because she was out with her daughter shopping, so she would have had an alibi. But because there was no signs of forced entry, she had to come up with some crazy story that, oh, my husband was just so devastated about his cancer diagnosis. He left this note, but I got rid of it. But it did say that he ended his own life, but I have to stage the scene to make it look like a homicide so I can get this $300 life insurance. I mean, make it make sense. And thankfully, the jury was not buying her story. But there's no such thing as a perfect crime because the truth always comes out in the end, and she will spend the rest of her life behind bars. But let me know what you guys thought of this story in the comments. Thanks for watching. I love you all. We'll see you in the next one. And please take care of yourselves.
Right away, Judy's stomach turned into this huge knot, and she immediately understood exactly what was going on here. A man she had never met before introduced himself as Michael Obregon, and he said that he was Bert's brother-in-law. He explained that he had just picked Bert up from Dorothy's house, and now they were headed to a place in Utah where he would be staying with his family. And Judy, the woman who has spent weeks trying to get anybody to put Bert on the phone, immediately asked Michael if she could speak with him, just, to make sure that he was okay. But Michael quickly explained that, Bert was feeling a little under the weather and really wasn't up for talking right now. And Judy was like, okay, then can you at least give me the number of where you're staying at and maybe I can call him once he feels better? But Michael wouldn't give her the number. He just kept repeating that Bert was fine, that he was with family, there's no need to worry. But the longer they spoke, the more Judy started to feel like this man wasn't trying to help her find Bert or reassure her that he was okay. On the contrary, it felt like he was just trying to persuade her to give up. And after going back and forth for a little while, Judy just finally hung up. Like, she was completely over it. But as soon as she set her phone down, she noticed that the same number had called her earlier. Curious to what the message said, Judy pressed play, and almost immediately she heard Michael's voice again. Only this time, he said, "Hi, this is Donald Anthony," and then he suddenly cut himself off. And there was this awkward silence, almost like the second that name left his mouth, he realized that he just made a huge mistake. And when he started speaking again, he quickly tried to correct himself by saying, "Sorry, it's Michael Obregon. I'm Bert's brother-in-law." And right away, Judy's stomach turned into this huge knot, and she immediately understood exactly what was going on here. Dorothy had never allowed her to speak to Bert. She had repeatedly changed the date of when he was supposed to return, and now some man that Judy has never heard of was using a fake name, pretending to be Bert's relative and refusing to let her speak to him directly. So Judy grabbed her phone again, but this time she called the police.
This is the story of Christopher Whitaker. Born in Fayetteville, Tennessee, Christopher is the youngest of 7 siblings. His father was never in his life, and his mother passed away when he was just 8 years old, leaving his great aunt to raise him briefly before his older sister decided to take the primary role. She moved the family to Cleveland, Ohio. Growing up on East 144th Street, Christopher is heavily exposed to domestic violence, watching his sister get physically abused by her boyfriend, who is also addicted to heroin. Christopher said he felt hopelessness and guilt that he could not protect his sister. Around the late 80s, Christopher decided to drop out of school, and to survive, him and his brothers decided to sell drugs. But Christopher not only sold drugs, he got addicted. He started relying on alcohol, marijuana, and crack cocaine, and his addiction to cocaine worsened throughout the 90s. In late 1998, Christopher forced his way inside of a home in an attempt to rob it. He seen car keys and decided to take off with the car instead. Now, he was quickly apprehended and he pled guilty, sentenced to 2 years supervised probation. But with that crack addiction, he repeated the same exact crime, but he got off that time due to lack of evidence. On April 8th, 2005, now 32 years old, Christopher went to go visit a friend's house. Now, his friend shared an apartment with his girlfriend. Christopher went over there looking for his friend, and she said that he was not here right now. Christopher then asked, could he use the restroom? Now, once he got into the restroom, he seen a pair of scissors. He came out the restroom and he ambushed her. She begged Christopher not to do this, and he laughed and choked her till she became unconscious. He then beat and raped her. Before he fled the scene, he stabbed her twice in the neck, thinking she's dead, but no, she regained consciousness. She's seen that she has been stabbed. She's seen that she has been sexually assaulted due to the wetness in between her legs, and she still was able to crawl to the living room to get her phone to dial 911. She survived this attack, and Christopher was arrested 4 days later. Due to the severity of the crime, he was hit with a rape charge, attempted murder, kidnapping, sexual battery, and 2 counts of felonious assault. He pled guilty and took a plea deal that dropped the most serious charges, attempted murder and rape. He was sentenced to 4 years in prison, and he had to register as a Tier 3 sex offender. Following his 2009 release, Christopher couldn't find a job due to that Tier 3 sex offender on his list, so he decided to smoke crack again. And still, he had even lost his house. stealing items worth $100K or more. This landed him back in jail in 2012 to serve 2 more years. After his 2014 release, you would think he would get his shit together, but no. Just 2 years later, on January 26, 2017, Christopher was by a bus stop loitering when he seen 14-year-old Aliana DeFries. Aliana is from Michigan. She comes from a close-knit family. Early in her life, she was diagnosed with a pronounced development disability. She will have cognitive delays, meaning as she grows mentally, she will not. Her family relocated to Cleveland and she enrolled in E-Prep Village Prep Woodland Hills, a charter school. Her teacher said that she was bubbly and always smiling. But despite her being 14, her disability kept her innocent. She would kind of shy away from hanging with the other teens. She would rather go home, watch cartoons, or play with her Barbie dolls. By late 2016, Aliana enters the 7th grade, and she's now required to ride the city bus to school independently. On January 26, 2017, she was on her way to school when Christopher seen her. Aliana stepped off the bus at around 6:50 a.m. and she started walking to her transfer point to wait on her second bus, and Christopher is following closely behind. As soon as she passed True Gospel Baptist Church, he grabbed her. He drug her across the lot and forced her into an abandoned house. Once inside, he forced her upstairs into a dark room that had nothing but debris in it. He tied her up and sexually assaulted her. Once he was done, he was walking around the abandoned house looking for power tools or any type of tools he could find. He found an electric drill, a screwdriver, a box cutter, a hammer, and he used all these items to kill this 14-year-old. Using the electric drill on her skull, he left her there. At around 11 a.m., he went to a church to talk to a pastor that he would frequently do and ask for odd jobs. The pastor said that he could help unload a truck for a little extra cash, and the pastor said his demeanor gave off no warning, that he was acting like himself. The school didn't notify Aliana's parents, saying that she was absent until around 4 p.m. At 4:15 p.m., they were reporting her missing. Over the next 48 hours, they had conducted over 80 interviews, knocked on doors, looked at surveillance footages. They even looked at the footage from the bus, and they could see a man standing really close to Aliana, but they can't see who it is. Just 2 days later, on January 29th, while sweeping the area, somebody noticed that the door was missing from the abandoned house and decided to go in there. When they entered, there was a trail of blood leading upstairs, and that's when they found the body of 14-year-old Aliana DeFries. It was a torn condom by her and multiple construction tools. When Christopher got wind that the body was found and they were looking for a suspect, he panicked. He offered a friend $20 to take him out of town, which that friend declined. On February 1st, his DNA came back as a match. Now his face is plastered everywhere. That very next day, after getting a tip from an informant, Christopher was found in an eastern suburb of Cleveland, hiding out. He quickly surrendered. He was charged with aggravated assault, rape, kidnapping, tampering with a corpse, you name it. Now, his initial interrogation, he said that he didn't know Aliana and that he had never seen her before in his life. Now, when he got inside the jail and made a phone call, they were listening. Christopher was trying to coerce a lady to tell the detectives that they were drinking in the abandoned house and they had consensual sex, and that's how his DNA got in there. And she said, hell no. Plus, they hear you. When he seen that he had no dog in the fight, he confessed. He said that he was so high on cocaine he had blacked out and that he was a monster for what he did. He said that he didn't want to make a circus out of this. I just want to go to court and get this over with. Well, let me tell you something, thick neck bitch. You don't get that. You can't say, we gonna make a circus out of this, because it needs to be a circus out of this. Fat funky. March 26, 2018, he was sentenced to death. Talking about I don't want to make no circus out of this. You don't got no control no more. Meaty head bitch. R.I.P. to Aliana DeFries. Fuck is he, boy?
Imagine being a famous Hollywood star on a TV show but end up being let go because you're too old. You're all stressed out and end up getting into a car accident on the way home. You go to the doctor and he tells you you're fine because you're not injured, and before you're ready to leave, a nurse just wants to look at your spine. As you're getting ready to leave, you find a note that had been slipped into your pocket and it says, "It changed my life," with a flash drive that says the substance and a phone number on the back.
You get home and obviously you want to know what's on that flash drive, and you see a green liquid vial that can turn yourself into a hotter, younger version of yourself. You're intrigued, so you call the number and end up picking the substance in a strange alleyway. When you get home, you open the box you're given and it has special instructions. You inject yourself with this substance and a new and improved version of yourself literally climbs out of your back. Your mind is in this new body and your old body is just kind of laying there. One of the main rules is you need to switch your older self and your younger self every 7 days or else. Everything's going pretty well so far. You're young and beautiful, and you even get hired at your old job, and everyone is so impressed, like you've been doing this for so many years. Your new self is getting treated better than your old self, so you decide to go over the 7 days, and once you do switch back, you see that one of your fingers is literally old, like it belongs to a 90-year-old. Your new self is not obeying the rules, so every time you switch back to your old self, you look older every time. So you decide to end your younger self so your older self doesn't end up unalived. Your younger self ends up finding out what you're trying to do, and let's just say that it ends in chaos. But don't worry, you end up as a blob on your Hollywood star just staring at the stars at night.
She gets on the bus, but then she's never seen again. What happened to Alyssa Marie Vasquez? Alyssa Marie Vasquez was 12 years old and living in Doraville, Georgia at the time of her disappearance on January 28, 2003. Her nicknames were Lily and Alyssa. She loved to dance, loved music, and was extremely close with her mother, Shannon. She was known as just a goofy, fun-loving girl. She did have ADHD and OCD, so her mother had actually been trying to find a school that could better work with her. So on January 28th, 2003, she will have her first day at her new school in Clarkston. She had to take a public MARTA bus there, though, because her mother was on bed rest and her father wasn't able to, so this was her only option. Her mother was very nervous about this, but she was very excited about her first day of school. During Alyssa's lunch break, she called her mom, Shannon, to let her know that everything was going great, and Shannon would say that she sounded so happy. It was totally normal. But this would be the last time Shannon ever talked to Alyssa. When school ended, witnesses say that they saw Alyssa boarding the bus. She was supposed to get off near her home where her father and her brother were waiting for her, but she never arrived. And nobody reported seeing her get off on any of the other stops. She somehow vanished between boarding the bus and getting off. There's not a whole lot of details out about her case, but I would just love to know how many witnesses said that she got on the bus. Were these reliable people? I'm very curious about the witnesses who said that she did get on the bus. Can we trust them? Is it like one person, 2 people, 10 people? That would make a difference to me here. For years, Alyssa was actually classified as a runaway and then was reclassified as an endangered runaway. And unfortunately, this is really where her story ends. There's just really no details after her getting on that bus. Her family has continued to try to figure out what happened to her, but after 23 years, there's just more questions than answers. If she got on that bus, how did she get off and where? As of August 2026, Alyssa remains missing. If you or anybody you know has any information regarding her disappearance, you can reach out to the DeKalb County Police Department. Thank you for listening to Alyssa's story. Be sure to follow for more true crime, and if you have any case recommendations, feel free to comment, directly message me, or fill out the suggest a case form in my link tree in my bio.
This mom films herself abusing her stepdaughter and then posts it online. Katrina is a mom on TikTok who has her own biological daughter but chooses to only abuse her stepdaughter and then post the abuse on the internet. There is a video of Katrina purposefully hurting her stepdaughter while her stepdaughter is screaming in pain.
Go! No! Smart ass.
There is also another video where Katrina's stepdaughter, Hazel, is screaming and saying, "Why are you hitting us in the face?"
Knock you. I told you, fuck. Why are you knocking us in the face? Girl, I went like this. No, you didn't.
I'm also very worried that Katrina is also abusing her dog, based off the way she talks about how much she hates her dog, which just baffles me because how can you hate an animal?
Literally hate this dog. I literally hate her. If she was gone, my stress level would significantly decrease. I've never hated an animal in my entire life.
Something that really concerns me is the fact that Katrina had over 70,000 followers. It just makes me wonder how many creeps followed Katrina to watch her abuse her child. But what do you guys think about all of this?
This show has me questioning something I don't think I've ever asked myself before, which is whether justice and revenge are actually the same thing, or if we say they're not because one is technically legal. There's this new psychological thriller called Furious, where we've got this woman who's faced hardships her whole life. I mean, her entire childhood was basically taken from her before she even got the chance to live it. And now as an adult, she's taking her life back into her own hands. And normally, whenever I see something like this, I already know how I'm supposed to feel about the person doing the killing. But this one is different because I actually don't know if she's in the wrong. Like, is that bad of me to say? It's just so hard to not empathize with her when you're literally watching the system fail her. And what makes it even messier is the FBI agent who's trying to hunt her down. She has her own story of being failed by the same exact people who were supposed to protect her and didn't. And now she has to work alongside those same people to catch a woman who decided to stop waiting for anyone to save her. I don't think this show wants you to like pick a side or anything. I just think it wants you to realize that you might not be able to. Like, these are two women going in circles chasing two different definitions of justice. And when you put it like that, I don't know. This is Furious. The first 3 episodes of Furious are streaming now on Hulu and Hulu on Disney+.
The 8 passengers case is quite a disturbing one. Hi, I'm Meg, I talk about true crime, and today we're going to be talking about how this family vlogging channel turned out to be a child's worst nightmare.
If you think it's funny, then that was 7 months ago. Maybe you need longer without a bedroom.
You're gonna lose the privilege to eat dinner.
Family vlogging was huge back in 2015. And that was the year that Ruby Franke started the 8 Passengers channel. Because family vlogging was at its peak, their channel grew pretty quickly. Their channel would end up reaching 2.5 million subscribers. They were a Mormon family living in the suburbs of Utah. The parents were Kevin and Ruby Franke, and they had 6 kids who were all homeschooled. And at first, everything in this family seemed pretty normal. The perfect family facade would sometimes slip. Ruby would make comments towards her children or about her parenting style that people did not agree with. In one video, she told her sons that if they didn't stop play fighting, they would lose privilege to have dinner that night.
You are? Please say it one more time, and then you're gonna lose the privilege to eat dinner.
You can tell in that video that both boys were just having fun, like no one was getting hurt. They were being kids. In another video, her 6-year-old child forgot their lunch at home, and this is what she had to say.
So the natural outcome is she's just going to need to be hungry, and hopefully nobody gives her food and nobody steps in and gives her a lunch.
In 2020, Ruby's controversial parenting styles went pretty viral, and not in a good way. Ruby shared in one of her videos that her eldest son lost privileges to his bedroom and had been sleeping on a beanbag for 7 months. And do you know why? Because he pranked his little brother by waking him up in the night and telling him they were going to Disney. It was a prank. These types of pranks are normal with siblings. Like when I was young, I asked my sister to get me a glass of water, and she got me toilet water.
I've been sleeping on a beanbag since October, and they gave my room back like 2 weeks ago.
All the moments I just showed you did end up gaining media attention, and people were not happy with Ruby. And Kevin, but mostly Ruby because she was the one that usually talked about their parenting styles. People knew that there was something off about this family and that something was going on behind closed doors. People started signing petitions to try and get the children help, things like that. Because the backlash the channel was getting, Ruby and Kevin stopped making videos for the 8 Passengers channel, and it kind of died. But people didn't know the extent of how bad it really was. That's until the 30th of August of this year, when everything changed. Ruby and Kevin's 12-year-old son escaped the house through a window. He ran to a neighbor's house and begged this neighbor to give him water and food. He looked very malnourished, and he had duct tape around his wrists and ankles. He was also said to have deep cuts from rope being tied around him. Rope. The neighbor called 911 to report this, and it is honestly heartbreaking to listen to. The neighbor's literally crying while telling the police. Looking at this child made that man cry. So if that doesn't show the severity of the situation. When the police arrived to the home, they found another one of Ruby and Kevin's kids, a 10-year-old girl. She had also been clearly malnourished, and her and the 12-year-old boy were both taken to the hospital. The boy was taken mostly to address the wounds from all of the rope. Like, this is a 12-year-old boy we're talking about here. Those 2 children were taken to the hospital, and the rest of the children were put in the care of Child Protective Services. Going back in time to 2022, the 8 Passengers channel was dormant. But Ruby Frankie decided to start a new YouTube channel with this woman. The channel was called Connections, and this woman was a therapist called Jody Hildebrandt. I say therapist, but her license was on hold at the time because she had been gossiping about one of her clients in their Mormon church. Really good therapist, yeah. The channel was meant to be a support group for women, but it was not. They had very extreme views. In fact, people who watched it found it very cult-like. In these videos, Ruby and Jody said some very controversial things, such as a parent should not love their child unconditionally, that children should not be listened to and do not deserve privacy. And I'm bringing this Jody woman up because it was actually her house that 12-year-old boy climbed out of. So when the police showed up to check out the situation, they showed up on Jody's doorstep, and they found that 10-year-old girl malnourished. I think that Jody and Ruby were working on a video together, and that's why the kids were at Jody's house. But yeah, both Jody and Ruby were arrested because obviously there was child abuse going on. The eldest daughter was there. Her name was Sherry Frankie, and she actually posted this on her Instagram story as the arrest was happening. Ruby and Jody were both charged with 6 felony counts of child abuse. Jody's niece actually came out and spoke about her experience living with her aunt. She claimed to have lived with Jody and was receiving therapy from her, but it was not therapy, it was straight up abuse. She said that just like Ruby's kids, she had been duct taped and things like that, and the whole duct taping thing came from her aunt, not from Ruby. She expressed that a lot of the news coverage is on Ruby because she was the mother of the 8 Passengers YouTube channel, but that the abuse that they were talking about with the ropes and stuff was all Jody. She basically thinks that Jody influenced Ruby to start punishing or parenting, as she calls it, her kids like that. Things get even more messed up when Ruby had to attend a hearing to discuss the custody of her 4 minor children. Ruby said some absolutely shocking things during this hearing. She allegedly claimed, that one of her minor children had been essaying their siblings and other children in the neighborhood. And this next bit is a bit complicated because we don't have names, but so the child was essaying one of their siblings, and apparently that sibling then started essaying other kids with them. Now, I don't know why Ruby said this. Maybe she was like trying to warn them, or maybe that was her reasoning for tying up her children. I don't know. Ruby Frankie apparently had no proof to back this up at all. The children's father and Ruby's now ex-husband Kevin was at this hearing, and apparently when she was revealing all of this, he just stared straight ahead and said nothing. You're probably wondering, like, she's not really talked about the father at all. Where does he stand in all of this? Well, I'm also confused about this. I don't know what to believe. I don't know. Kevin and Ruby had separated, and they had been separated for about a year and a bit when she got arrested. He was not living with her, and I think the kids, from what I can see, were mostly with Ruby. And maybe things just got really severe and really bad after the separation when she met, what's her name again, the therapist woman, Jody. Maybe Jody is the reason it got that bad, but what was happening before in the vlogs clearly was not healthy either. Maybe it went from mental to physical when he left. I don't know. Kevin himself has denied any involvement in the abuse, but he is the father of those children, and those children were not being protected. And for all those years that the YouTube channel existed, he was there. He was there when his son slept on a beanbag for 7 months. He thought that that was an okay parenting technique. So he was somewhat involved in the controversial parenting that they showed online, but I don't know how far it went. No one knows how far it went. He's reportedly trying to get his kids back into his custody, and people are very iffy about that. Some people are arguing that maybe Kevin himself was a victim of Ruby's, but no one knows. I'm intrigued to see where this case goes next, and I will keep you updated on it. But that is everything so far for this case. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next video. Let me know down below what case you want me to cover next. Bye!
8 years ago today, Chris Watts annihilated his entire family, and now he's getting married again. On the 13th of August 2018, Shanann Watts would return back to her home in Frederick, Colorado following a work trip, only to be smothered to death by her husband Chris, who would go on to do the exact same thing to their daughters Bella and Cece. Shanann was buried in a shallow grave at one of Chris's work sites, and both Bella and Cece would be forced into oil tanks. The Watts family murder is one I have extensively covered over on my podcast True Crime with Caitlin, which is available to listen to right now if you would like to hear about this case in its entirety. For these absolutely horrifying murders, Chris Watts will never be released from prison. However, during his incarceration, he has found God and seemingly a new woman. This woman is allegedly called Lizzie Henderson, but apparently she is already going by Lizzie Watts and has changed her name legally to reflect this. Lizzie works as a realtor, and when she was asked how her and Chris came to be romantically connected, she said that's between her, him, and God. In 2025, she visited Chris at Dodge Correctional Facility, where he is being held, at least 20 times, so that's like almost 2 times a month that she was going to see him, and she also spent Christmas Day with him. During their visits, they could be seen talking, laughing, hugging and kissing, and telling each other that they loved each other. She is said to be absolutely enamored by Chris, and that she recognizes that some people might find their relationship weird or strange because of what Chris has done, but apparently this isn't fazing her. She has allegedly moved closer to the prison where Chris is being held just to be closer to him, and has applied for marriage. Comment down below and let me know what you think.
If you ever find a drawer in your house that's been nailed shut, whatever you do, don't open it. It's very possible something was locked inside to keep it from escaping, because if it does, things could get very, very bad. There was a family who moved into this old farmhouse way out in the country, but just weeks after settling in, they experienced something truly terrifying, and it all began when they opened a drawer that had been nailed shut by the previous owners. On the day they first moved in, while their parents were still unpacking and getting things organized, Mia and Max began exploring the house to see what they could find. And after checking most of the rooms, Max ended up in the kitchen, where he started going through cabinets and drawers, hoping the previous owners had left something behind, especially since they had left so suddenly without much warning. When he reached the last drawer tucked in the corner of the kitchen, he tried to open it, but it wouldn't budge. It had been nailed shut, and whoever sealed it off clearly did not want it open, but Max kept at it until he finally pried it open, and inside he found this very creepy white porcelain mask that looked like a mold of someone's real face. But Max did not see it as creepy, he just thought it was cool and decided to keep it in his room on his dresser. But over the next few days, something very strange started happening. Every morning when Max woke up, the mask wasn't on the dresser where he left it. One day it would be on the kitchen counter, another day it was at the bottom of the stairs, and once he even found it in the bathroom. Max was convinced that Mia had been sneaking into his room at night just to mess with him. Mia swore she wasn't, but this turned into a constant argument. Max calling her a liar, Mia getting angry that he didn't believe her, and eventually their mom had enough. She took the mask and hid it in the back of her bedroom closet where neither of them could get to it. But the next morning when she walked into Mia's room, she stopped in her tracks, completely off guard. There was Mia sitting on her bed playing quietly, and right beside her was the mask. Mia insisted that she hadn't touched it. She didn't go into her mom's closet in the middle of the night. She said it just magically appeared on her bed when she woke up that morning. But it kept happening. No matter where their mom hid the mask, behind books, in drawers, even in the attic, every single morning Mia was back in her room playing with it like it had never been moved. Eventually they just gave up. Whether Mia
Mia was somehow finding it or the mask was somehow finding her didn't really matter anymore. They just let her keep it. And from that point on, Mia became completely attached to the mask. She wouldn't go anywhere without it, and before long she began sleeping with it on, which deeply unsettled her parents. Sometimes they'd peek into her room late at night and find her fast asleep with the porcelain mask over her face. This went on for weeks, but things finally came to a head one morning when Mia refused to take the mask off before school. That was the breaking point. Her parents told her enough was enough, the mask had to go. So later that night, after everyone was asleep, Max quietly snuck into Mia's room. Careful not to wake her, he gently removed the mask from her face, then he walked downstairs, went into the kitchen, and reopened the drawer where he'd first found it. Using the nails that were still there, he sealed it shut again, just hoping that it would be the end of it. But the next morning, Mia was gone. Her mom walked into her room expecting to see her playing with the mask like always, but the room was silent. Mia's bed was made, her toys were untouched, and lying right in the center of her bed was the white porcelain mask. When her mom picked it up, her hands went cold because from deep inside the mask, a faint voice whispered, "Please don't put me back in the drawer." The family searched every room, every inch of the property, but Mia had vanished without a trace. So they did the only thing they could. They placed the mask back into the drawer it came from, hammered it shut with twice as many nails as before, and then, just like the family before them, they packed up and abandoned the farmhouse without saying a word. No one has lived there since, and as far as we know, that drawer has never been opened again. If you've made it to the end of this video and you haven't had a chance to check the caption, please know this is a fictional story. This is not real, it didn't happen, it's entirely made up, but thank you so much for being here and for watching, and I will see you in my next video.
For nearly 11 months, his family searched for him, not knowing his body was already buried on a serial killer's property. His name was Johnny Joe Coxey Jr., a 29-year-old South Carolina native who was so much more than a victim. He was a son, a brother, a husband, and a father. Johnny was married to Megan Coxey, and together they were raising their family, including Johnny's young son Jonathan, his daughter Madeline, and his stepson Andrew. In December of 2015, Johnny and Megan had recently been released from jail when they were told about an opportunity to make some money cleaning up rental properties. They had no reason to believe that accepting that job together would be the last decision they ever made. The man offering them the work was Todd Colehip, and at the time, Johnny had no idea what he was dealing with. Todd had managed to hide behind the image of being a successful real estate broker, property owner, and pilot, but underneath that ordinary-looking life was a history of extreme violence. In 2003, he walked into Superbike Motorsports in Chesney, South Carolina, and murdered 4 people, and somehow he got away with it for more than a decade. Then Johnny and Megan crossed paths with him. They arrived at Todd's 95-acre property expecting to work. Johnny was shot and killed almost immediately. Megan was kept alive for 6 days before Todd shot her in the back of the head on Christmas Day, and then their family lost all contact with them. Megan's mother reported the couple missing on December 22nd, and for almost a year, their family was left with questions nobody could answer. They were still looking for him, still hoping that he would come home, while his body was lying in a shallow grave on the very property where he had been murdered. It wasn't until November of 2016 that Johnny and Megan were finally found. Todd had been exposed after another couple, Kayla Brown and Charlie Carver, disappeared. Police searching his property found Kayla alive, chained inside a metal storage container. Kayla told them Todd shot Charlie in front of her, and once the investigation closed in around him, Todd confessed and led police to Johnny and Megan's graves. Johnny's autopsy showed that he had died from multiple gunshot wounds to his torso. For his family, that discovery brought an unbearable kind of closure. They finally knew where Johnny was, but they also had to accept that he was never coming home alive. His mother, Cindy Coxey, later confronted Todd at his sentencing and spoke about the devastating moment of having to explain to Johnny's young son that his father had been murdered. In May of 2017, Todd Colehip pleaded guilty to 7 murders and received 7 consecutive life sentences without parole, plus an additional 60 years. This case was personally recommended to me by a family member, and I'm sorry, I need a hug. I'm sorry that you have to live with this loss, and that monster basically got away with it for so many years. I'm so sorry. Bring it in. I need a hug. You need a hug. Just come on. With that being said, what do you guys think about this case? Leave your thoughts in the comments below.
I don't know how this man was able to keep his composure when he was sitting across from a man who confessed to murdering his own sister. And to this day, we still have no idea where her body is. So stick around and listen to this story. And if you have any information, please contact the Colorado Police Department. So this is Max, and he's very close with his sister, Lee Porter. They live with their mother, Renee, and their stepfather, Michael. Now, they used to live in California, but they eventually moved to Colorado. In 2013, Lee was graduating high school, where Max had graduated college with a degree in massage therapy, and he found a job out in California. Now, Lee was also going to go to college to get a degree in massage therapy as well, so she could work with her brother. But when she started college, she became very depressed, and she was really missing her family, especially her brother, because they were very close. On June 3rd, 2014, Lee had texted her mother, Renee, saying how much she loved her and hoped she was doing okay. She said, "I love you too and hope everything is going well." Then 2 days later, Max had called his mother, Renee, in a frantic, saying he's not been able to get a hold of his sister, Lee, and they talked every day. Now, thankfully, Lee was on her mother's phone plan, so she was able to look at the phone calls and saw that she stayed at a hotel the day before she disappeared with a man named Jesse. So Renee reported Lee missing, and they did speak with Jesse. He claims that he said goodbye to Lee at the hotel, but he has not seen or heard from her since. Now, Jesse is Lee's boyfriend, and he had lied about his age when they had met. He was 38 years old when he met Lee when she was only 18. And Max was very concerned about his sister. She was becoming depressed, she was skipping classes and spending more time with her boyfriend, and he was using, and then Lee also started using as well. And apparently, he also had a very short temper. Now, Max agreed not to say anything to their mother because he didn't want to push his sister further away. But eventually, Lee and Jesse broke up, and she was on the way to recovery and was trying to find a job. And Max had texted her on June 3rd, asking if she needed some money to help get back on her feet, but she never responded. So Renee is going through her daughter's call logs, and she was calling a number frequently in Westminster, Colorado, and it was the last call that she had made before she disappeared. So she calls this number, and a man answers, and he says his name is Chris Wade. Now, Chris claims he went to high school with Lee, and he was offering her a place to stay because she had broken up with her boyfriend. But they spent the day together on June 3rd, but she did not spend the night because they were not close friends. Now, Chris had stated that Lee came over and she had narcotics on her, and he confronted her about it before she had left. So Chris had no idea that Lee was even missing, and he wanted to help out in any way that he could to try to find her. He was posting on Facebook and even went to the news. But Renee thought something was off with his demeanor when he was speaking to the news reporter.
She was just angry at me because I was playing the part of a concerned friend. I don't really have very many friends, but the friends I do have, I'm very loyal to. Even losing one is a heavy blow for me. I want her to be safe, and I want her to know that I want the best for her.
Now, Chris seems very helpful in trying to find Lee. He said that they hung out that day, they went out to get something to eat, they came back, played video games. Then Lee received a text, and then a man in a truck pulled up, she got into the vehicle and went off with this man. Now, this is a completely different story that he told Lee's mother, Renee. So they searched Chris's apartment, and it's absolutely disgusting. There's old food on the floor, there's garbage everywhere, and they end up finding a blade with bleach stains on it right next to his bed. Now, he claims that he cut himself and cleaned the blade off, but they did end up finding a receipt for latex gloves and also bleach. They also noticed that the sheets on his bed were missing. He claims that Lee got a nosebleed and they were just in the hamper. So they're like, "Can we see those sheets?" Then he decides to change his story, and he says, "Oh, Lee took the sheets with her when she left," which makes absolutely no sense. So Chris was brought down to the station for questioning, and they were asking him what his intentions were when he invited Lee over. Now, he claims he was just trying to be a good friend. He wasn't going to make any advances towards her because she just got out of a relationship. But he didn't want to speak any further and demanded a lawyer. Now, they have no evidence tying him to the disappearance of Lee, so they had to let him go, but they kept him under surveillance. So Max was talking to Chris, pretending that he was on his side because he wanted to find out what happened to his sister. And Chris eventually agreed to meet Max at a park to do a tarot card reading. Well, eventually, Max decided to get his phone out and hit record without Chris knowing. He basically told him, please just tell us what happened. I'm not the one to hold a grudge. Eventually, the truth is going to come out. And eventually, Chris starts to talk. So Chris had offered Lee a place to stay. They went out to lunch, came back and played video games. And then apparently, Lee had asked Chris for some money and he said no. And apparently, she grabbed a knife and threatened him. But Max did not believe his story. He's like, no, stop lying. My sister would never do that. But he had to keep his composure to keep Chris talking. So apparently Lee was trying to stab Chris multiple times. So eventually he started to choke her. And that knife was in between them and it accidentally went into her sternum and she went limp. Then he took her body and put it in a dumpster. Now Chris had told Max, don't worry, I will turn myself in within a week. And Max just lost it. He said, no, you're going to go to jail right now. And then he just jumped over that table and started attacking him. But little did they know that the police were still surveilling them and they had witnessed this entire meeting. So then Max made Chris call 911 and confess to the murder of Lee Porter. Now, they do not believe this was self-defense whatsoever because Chris is in the Army and he was also practicing self-defense in jiu-jitsu. But he was discharged from the Army after 2 years because he told psychiatrists that he had fantasies about SAing and murdering women. But also in high school, Chris had tried to kidnap a girl where he planned on murdering her, but got scared off by a dog and ran away. And also, he planned on going to school for criminal justice to be a police officer. This does not make sense. So they searched that landfill for a number of days trying to find Lee's body. And on the 19th day, they did find Lee's clothing, her purse, and also her phone, but no signs of Lee's body. And after 45 days of searching, they still have not found her body. So they offered Chris a plea deal if he pleads guilty to second-degree murder and just tell us where her body is. So after he signed the plea agreement, he still had the same story that he just put her body in a dumpster. But they cannot break this plea deal because they have no proof that he is lying about where he had put her body. But Lee's mother, Renee, and also myself believe he does have her body somewhere so he can visit her whenever he wants. So on November 6, 2015, Chris was sentenced to 48 years in prison and he will have to serve 75% of his sentence before he is up for parole. So I believe he will serve about 36 years before he is up for parole. We have failed Lee and she should be here with us today. Why was he able to go into the Army if he tried to kidnap a girl in high school with intent to murder her? And then the Army just discharges him after 2 years because he had sick fantasies about harming women, but yet they didn't really do anything else about it. Go get him a psychiatric evaluation. It makes absolutely no sense to me. He was a serial killer in the making and he should never be released from prison. He's a danger to society. And we still have no idea where Lee's body is at. Now, myself and Lee's mother, Renee, we believe he has her body somewhere where he only knows where she is at so he can visit her whenever he wants. This man is a predator, a monster, and a danger to society. And I pray he serves the maximum sentence of the 48 years. And it's not fair he was able to keep that plea deal without even knowing where she still is at. So if you have any information, please contact the Colorado Police Department because we need to give this family closure. But let me know what you guys thought of this story in the comments. Thanks for watching. Love you all. We'll see you in the next one. And please take care of yourselves.
What happened to this couple at sea was so horrific they made a horror film about it. Their presumed fate is one of my worst nightmares. Tom and Eileen Lonergan were a married couple from Baton Rouge, Louisiana. They met at university and everyone just felt like they were destined to be together. They both adored the sea. Eileen was a keen scuba diver and Tom had dreams of studying marine biology. In 1995, they moved to Fiji for 3 years, basically living the dream, going on dives and working as school teachers. Eileen gushed to her mum in one of her letters home about this dive that they'd been on. She'd touched a whale and it was literally one of the most magical magical thing she'd ever experienced. Tom went on this dive too, and he said it was so good that he chillingly wrote in his diary, "I feel like my life is complete and I'm ready to die." It would be a horrible foreshadowing for what was about to happen. Now, they decided to leave Fiji after a few years and travel the world, and their first stop was Australia. In January 1998, they arrived and checked into their hostel and got ready for a dive that they had booked. However, this original dive was called off due to poor weather conditions. The visibility was really bad, but this only made them more determined to make a dive happen. They had no idea their next dive would be their last. On Sunday, the 25th of January, they set off on a boat with a company called Outer Edge. They left Port Douglas that day with a group of other divers. I believe there was a total of 26. When they arrived to the dive spot, they entered the water, and Tom and Eileen were very experienced, so they went off on their own. And then they were supposed to get back on the boat and go back to shore. When the time was up, people came out of the water, got back onto the boat, and did just that, without Tom and Eileen. I literally can't comprehend the absolute terror of coming back to the surface, Tom and Eileen realizing that nobody's there anymore, the boat's gone. Being completely alone, abandoned in the vast deep blue sea. The sea terrifies me anyway, even if I was literally with the boat and the other people, never mind being literally abandoned. They were 40 miles away from the shore. Bear in mind, it wasn't just the water that they needed to worry about. It wasn't just the deep blue sea. The seas in Australia are known to be home to some of the most deadly species of shark. It would be absolutely terrifying to be out there in the day, let alone when it starts to get darker and darker and darker. Though we cannot be certain what on earth happened to Tom and Eileen that day, there was some horrifying evidence discovered. It was an entire 2 days later when somebody actually noticed something was wrong. Now, if you don't want to spoil what happens next, I do go into a massive amount of detail in the Born Investigation podcast, but if you want a summary, keep listening. The couple's bags were found on the boat, including their passports and money, and this prompted a huge police search. Helicopters and boats sped out to try and see any sign of the missing couple. The story spread far and wide, and there were actually conflicting accounts as to whether a head count had even been conducted that day. Some passengers remembered one being done, some didn't. Regardless, it clearly hadn't worked even if one had been done, because 2 people were left behind. Now, it turned out that 2 weight belts of the couple were found under the water the day after they were abandoned, but obviously by that point nobody actually knew they were missing. Days after this, the official search was called off and hope was almost lost. That was until diving gear began washing up on the shore. This isn't a very good picture, but their life vests had been unbuckled and discarded, and they showed only coral damage, no evidence of a shark attack or anything. And something even more chilling. A dive slate with an eerie message: to anyone who can help us, we have been abandoned on something reef. 25th of January 1998, 3 p.m. Please help us, come to rescue us before we die. Help. But despite this, the couple's bodies were never found. There are a huge amount of theories online, things ranging from a murder and self-unaliving all the way to faking their own deaths. I've gone into loads of these theories on the pod, but ultimately they've now been missing for over 27 years. Diving was their passion. They were living their dream doing these dives. It's just a shame it turned into a nightmare.
On a scale from 1 to 10, how freaked out would you be if you learned that something not entirely human had been living inside your vent, watching you sleep every single night? Well, do I have a story for you. So there was this guy, we'll call him Jerry, and he'd only been living in his new place for a couple of weeks when he began hearing a series of very strange noises. Every single night, just after 3 a.m., Jerry would wake up feeling like someone was watching him. He would be completely drenched in sweat, heart racing, grab his glasses and start looking around the room, but there was never anyone there. But when he would finally just settle back into bed, he would hear this soft scraping sound coming from right above him. And one night, after who knows how long of pretending it wasn't real, he finally looked up and realized that the noise was coming from the ceiling vent, the one directly directly over his bed. This went on for weeks. Every single night, like clockwork, Jerry would wake up at 3 a.m., stare at the ceiling vent until the noises stopped, and then eventually just drift back to sleep. He was fed up, he was exhausted, he was sick of waking up in the middle of the night. So he went out and bought one of those little in-home security cameras, set it up in the corner of his room, aimed it right at the ceiling vent, and figured that this should give him the answers he was looking for. And at first, there really wasn't anything super unusual. Every morning, Jerry would check the footage, he'd see himself wake up around 3, hear the scraping, maybe toss and turn a little bit, then just fall back asleep. But then things started getting weird, because right after Jerry would fall asleep, the vent cover would start to move like something was pushing it open from the inside, and then the camera footage would cut out, only coming back a few hours later, usually when Jerry was waking up for work. So not only did it look like something was trying to get out of the vent above his bed, but also 3 hours of footage went missing every night, and Jerry had no clue why. Then one night, something changed. Jerry didn't wake up at 3. This time he woke up a little after 4, and he immediately grabbed his glasses and his phone, half hoping the camera had finally caught something, but also dreading what he might see. And I'm telling you, what he saw was like a horror movie, but it wasn't actors on the screen, it was him lying in his own bed. The video showed Jerry asleep, and then, like every night before, the vent above his bed slowly slid open like someone inside was trying to get out. But this time, instead of the video cutting out, it kept recording as a long, pale arm reached out, followed by a second. Both arms were so unnaturally long, stretching out so far that the long bony fingers attached to the hands almost touched Jerry, who was all the way in his bed. But instead of grabbing Jerry, the arms moved and folded, the joints were twisting and bending in the wrong direction. Jerry had never seen anything like it. Whatever this thing was, it was trying to pull itself completely out of the vent, but just as the top of the head began to peek out, the screen went black. Now, a few days later, Jerry's landlord showed up to collect the rent, which Jerry had never been late on before, but this time, not only had he missed it, no one had seen or heard from him in days. So when the landlord got to Jerry's house, the door was unlocked, he let himself in, but Jerry was nowhere to be found, so he was walking into the bedroom when he noticed the security camera Jerry had nailed on the wall. And of course, in typical landlord fashion, he was upset that Jerry had nailed something to the wall. He wasn't supposed to do it, so as he stepped closer to check the damage from the nails, his foot bumped something. He goes to crouch down, he grabs it, and he realizes it's Jerry's phone, which was not a good sign considering Jerry hadn't been heard from in days and was not at home. So the landlord turned the phone on and it opened right to the security camera app, and although it wasn't necessarily his business, he was so freaked out that he hit play on the most recent clip. And I can tell you that is something he wishes he never did, because what he saw is something he will never forget. The video starts off pretty normal. Jerry's sitting on the edge of his bed, facing away from the vent. The timestamp shows 4:05 a.m. He's hunched over, maybe watching something on his phone, and for a moment, that is all you see. But in the top corner of the video, the vent cover starts to move. The landlord keeps watching, and then he sees these two hands reach out from the vent, pressing flat against the ceiling. The proportions were off, the arms were way too long, and the elbows were bending in ways that just didn't make any sense. Whatever this thing was, it wasn't human. In the way it was pulling itself out of the vent and reaching out for Jerry, the landlord could tell it had done this plenty of times before. But just as the creature's head was about to come through the vent, the screen went dark. But it's not over. When the footage cuts back on, Jerry's legs are hanging out of the vent, just dangling there with no ounce of resistance or struggle, and he is slowly being pulled into the vent until the same non-human hand reaches out, grabs the vent cover, and snaps it shut. Obviously, the landlord freaked out, dropped the phone, called the cops, but despite a thorough search of the house, they found nothing. When they got to the vent above Jerry's bed, they had to pry the cover off. It was covered in this thick layer of dust, like no one had touched it in years. But the landlord was certain about what he'd seen on the video. When he tried to show the cops, the footage was gone. The security app just showed the startup screen like the camera had never even been connected. But of course, the investigators agreed to check the vent because the landlord was so insistent. And when they pried off the dusty vent cover and looked inside, they were shocked to find Jerry's glasses folded neatly and resting right on the edge of the vent opening. No one knows what happened to Jerry, and no one believes the landlord about the video footage, but there's no denying Jerry's glasses were found in that vent. So if you ever hear a soft scraping noise coming from your vents, maybe it's best to stay curious. You never know what might be watching you while you sleep. If you have made it to the end of this video and you haven't had a chance to check the caption, this is another fictional story. It's completely made up, didn't happen. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this story, let me know in the comments. Let me know if I should write another scary story and make a video about it, and I will see you in my next video.
This woman is Britain's worst child serial killer in modern history. She killed 7 infants and attempted to kill another 6. This is a very recent case and quite a sensitive one, so huge trigger warning. I also do not mean any disrespect when covering these cases. Hi, I'm Meg. I talk about true crime. Let's get into this case. You usually expect a serial killer to be lurking in the shadows, following you while you walk home at night, not an NHS nurse. At the age of 33, Lucy Lepke has been named Britain's worst baby killer in modern history. She's one of 3 women to ever receive a life sentence in the UK. Unlike most serial killers, there's no signs of trauma in her childhood that we know of. She grew up an only child with well-respected parents in a middle-class area in England. Her parents couldn't believe that she did this. She worked in a neonatal unit in Cheshire, England, so she was usually taking care of very vulnerable infants. A lot of them were premature, so they need 24-hour care. In the specific unit she worked in, 1 to 3 babies would die a year. That was the norm. That's until the year 2015 came around, and those numbers skyrocketed. June 2015, Lucy clocks out of work, basically so the system wouldn't see that she was working. Instead of leaving, she headed to 2 newborn babies. They were twins, and they both had been born the day before. The twins were 6 weeks premature, and Lucy injected air into both their bloodstreams, which killed the baby boy that day. The baby girl then started turning purple the next day, and the parents sobbed and begged for the doctors to do something. Luckily, they were able to save the baby girl. That night, Lucy was searching the twins' parents on Facebook. This became a pattern for Lucy. She started stalking the parents of the victims on social media. She would go searching for any Facebook posts about the death of their infants. She would look on 1-year anniversaries of the deaths, Christmas. It's just so unbelievably sinister. Days after attacking the 2 twins, she then did it again to 2 other infants. The doctors had no idea what was going on, so the head of department started investigating these deaths. There had been 3 infant deaths in 14 days, which was higher than the number of deaths that they had the year before. So the head of the department looks into it, and he sees that Lucy was the only person on all of those shifts. He went to another higher up with this information, and she actually said, "There's no way it could be Lucy." Her exact words were apparently, "Not nice, Lucy." Because the idea of it being Lucy was so unthinkable, they dropped it. People actually started pitying Lucy. They thought like, oh my god, she's having such bad luck on her shifts. The poor girl. Lucy began kind of a method when it came to these murders to ensure she wasn't caught. She would inject the infants right before her shift ended so that they would start deteriorating on somebody else's shift. She also targeted the most vulnerable infants, so the ones that were really premature or the ones who had conditions. That way, when they died, it seemed a bit less suspicious because they were already sick or premature or, something like that. So everyone thought, poor Lucy, she's so unlucky, 'cause she had to be the one, this makes it so much worse. She had to be the one who then bathed the infant afterwards, clothed it, and brought it to the parents. And apparently a lot of the time, she would do so sobbing. She would sit there and cry with the mother. In 2016, she started injecting infants with insulin, or she would overfeed them, or she would use the air in the bloodstream method. She would do it all in such a small period and kill loads of infants. She killed 2 brothers in a set of triplets, and she brought them to the mother, sobbing. This mother, who had just lost 2 of her 3 infants, said that Lucy cried just as much as she did, basically. Lucy had targeted at that point 13 infants and killed 7 of those 13. After the incident with the triplets, she was actually removed from the neonatal unit. She continued working in the hospital at the time. The hospital then started investigating all of the deaths, and her name kept coming up. They then brought their findings to the police, and under a year later, in 2018, Lucy was finally arrested. I cannot imagine having to tell those grieving parents that their infant didn't actually die of natural causes and that someone at the hospital, the staff, murdered their child. I also can't imagine being the parents, having to go to that trial. Like, oh my God. Lucy did not admit to any of her crimes. I posted a video of the arrest and some of the interrogation. It's linked in my comments. I couldn't fit it in here. But eventually police went through her stuff and they found some notes that she had written. I'm gonna read out what one of them said. It said, "I killed them on purpose because I'm not good enough to care for them. I'm evil, I did this." So if that's not a confession, I don't know what is. She apparently came off as really cold during the trial, because as the parents were reliving their trauma on the stand, she was just like blankly staring at nothing. It's also the fact that the parents had to find out that the person who bathed, clothed, and gave them their deceased infant was the person who murdered their infant. It's like, this has to be one of the most like disgusting killers I've covered, because I just like can't wrap my head around it. It's truly awful. Like I said at the start of the video, she did get life in prison, so she's not coming out. My heart seriously goes out to anyone who is affected by this, because it is quite recent. That is all for today's case. I really wasn't sure about this one, because I usually talk about true crime and do my makeup. I did it as usual, but I almost didn't want to do the makeup bit because it felt, I don't know, it felt wrong with this case. But hopefully you guys know that I never mean any disrespect when covering these cases. Yeah. It's terrifying that, like, this was a nurse in a hospital and you trust those people, you know? I hope that you guys have a good day despite hearing this truly awful case, and let me know what case you want me to cover next. I'll see you all in the next video. Bye. Oh, and don't forget to check out the interrogation and arrest video in the comments.
Charles Manson was one of the most infamous cult leaders in American history. When his name is brought up, it is immediately followed by how manipulative he was, how evil he was, and how this quote-unquote family that he built not only created complete mayhem, but also installed fear in every single person living in Hollywood at the time. So let me tell you about it. Charles Manson was born on November 12th of 1934 in Cincinnati, Ohio, to his mother, Kathleen, who was only 16 years old at the time. His birth certificate did not list a father, but as far as who his biological father actually was, to put it simply, he just wasn't in the picture. When Kathleen reached out to him and said, "Hey, I'm pregnant with your baby," he was like, "Oh, actually, I'm busy. I have business to attend to, so I'm gonna go." And Kathleen never saw him again after that. Once she gave birth, she was struggling to give her baby a name, but she had briefly married a man named William Eugene Manson right before her baby was born, and so her baby eventually became Charles Miles Manson. That is how the Manson name came to be. Kathleen and William's marriage was a quick one. They ended up getting divorced in 1937, and by then, Charles Manson was 2 years old and already in a position in which he had no stable home. Kathleen fits into what most people would call a neglectful mother. Pretty much everything in her life, no matter how big or small, she put above Charles as far as her list of priorities went. And although she was very young and she didn't feel like she was in a position to become a parent, the one thing that you cannot deny is the fundamental truth that Charles Manson's earliest years were unstable. He was unwanted, he was shuffled between strangers, and not shown any love by the one person who was supposed to love him the most. In 1939, Kathleen was sentenced to 5 years behind bars because she was involved in a robbery. So Charles Manson was 4 years old and then sent to live with his aunt and uncle in West Virginia. There he lived in a strict household that was, again, not a good environment for a child to grow up in. Kathleen was then released in 1942. She got Charles back in her care and she took him and moved them to Charleston. There she remarried and then tried and failed to have Charles put in foster care in 1947. Charles was then sent to Gibbalt School for Boys in Indiana, a boys' reform school, and he did not like it there, so much so that he ended up running away.
away. When he did, he was found, he was sent back, and then he ran away again. Throughout that time in his life, he began getting in trouble with the law as well for committing petty crimes. Then he was sent to Father Flanagan's Boys Town in Nebraska, a famous institution for troubled youth. There he lasted a whole 4 days before running away. By the early 1950s, when he was in his teenage years, his norm, or what felt like his norm, was cycling through juvenile detention facilities, reformatory schools, and federal prisons. And it was in one of these facilities that he met with a counselor who described Charles Manson as suffering from, quote, a marked degree of rejection, instability, and psychic trauma. And another evaluator noted that he had, quote, developed hostility towards women. So from a very young age, warning signs were present. And one of the biggest things that showed up throughout his youth was manipulation. Charles Manson learned how to manipulate people very early on in his life. And I think an easy way to explain it is by understanding that he had never had anyone in his life who showed care or love towards him. So attention and or love wasn't something that showed up in his life. So he understood that to get it, he needed to work for it. He needed to put in the effort to win people over, to get people to pay attention and listen to what he had to say and to care about the things that he said. And he did this with his words. For example, when he was a teenager, he would practice this and he would talk to people in a certain way to get them to trust him, so that then he would feel in control of the conversation and he would feel more powerful. And over time, I hate to say it, but he did become an expert at brainwashing people and making them believe whatever it was that he wanted them to believe. And by being in and out of custody, that also shaped Manson to be really comfortable with being isolated and alone. And he got arrested and convicted so many times that it was wired in his brain to not be scared of punishment. Punishment and loneliness were like the only two constants that he ever had in his life. So all of those things combined shaped Charles Manson to be an excellent manipulator who wasn't scared of much. And when you have a person like that, it becomes very dangerous very quickly. In his early to mid-20s, Charles Manson found himself in prison yet again, and it was there that he began to study Scientology. There was a Scientologist in there with him, and it's believed that Manson underwent 150 hours of the Scientology process known as auditing. Auditing is essentially a very intense form of one-on-one questioning designed to surface and clear past traumas and negative past experiences. And while he was doing that, staff members at the prison saw it as a positive thing because he was talking about his trauma and his experiences and whatnot, but Charles Manson wasn't spending time doing that to heal his inner trauma. What he was actually doing was learning how exactly the auditing process worked. From Scientology, he took the auditing process in which a person confesses their deepest fears, traumas, and secrets to another person, and essentially created a manual for how to get inside of someone's head and control them. Manson took that and later on used it to build his quote-unquote family, aka his cult following. And when I say the family, by the way, I'm referring to the cult that he created because that is what they referred themselves to be. When Charles Manson walked out of prison on March 21st, 1967, after 7 years behind bars, he was 32 years old and a completely different person than the kid who had first been locked up as a teenager. Prison had shaped him to be something way more calculated because now he was a man who had spent years learning how to read people, how to identify vulnerability, and tell someone exactly what they needed to hear to be able to gain their trust. When he got out, he headed straight to San Francisco at the exact moment that the city was exploding with this counterculture movement. At this point in time, there was an entire new generation of people who had flooded to the San Francisco area for what they called the Summer of Love. So a generation that was kind of rebelling, a generation that chose to reject their parents' values and instead was looking for a promise of freedom and new beginnings, and a newfound searching of freedom. Charles Manson, guitar in hand, with this new confidence that he had, walked directly into the middle of it. He would approach strangers and ask, "Don't you know who I am?" And just like that, the family began to form around him. He did not find followers. He found lost people and made them believe that he was exactly what they were looking for. Charles Manson successfully targeted vulnerable people, offered them a sense of belonging, and convinced them that he was a person that could teach them how to really live life the way that they were meant to. And he slowly started becoming a teacher in their eyes. And of course, in true cult leader fashion, his teachings were a mix of Scientology concepts, the Bible's book of Revelation, and his own paranoid thoughts and ideas. Among the earliest and most devoted followers of Charles Manson's were Susan Atkins, Patricia Krenwinkel, Leslie Van Houten, and Charles Tex Watson, all young people in their 20s. They eventually became this group, cough cough cult, and they started spending all of their time together. And eventually they got a hold of an old school bus that they took and started traveling around California, meeting other people along the way and recruiting them to be a part of, call it what it is, cult. The bus itself was an old but converted vehicle. It had all the seats removed, there were rugs and pillows laid down in their place, and it was painted in all kinds of colors. For roughly 18 months, they wandered around in said bus around the American West, through New Mexico, through Texas, through the Pacific Northwest, and then circling back around to California. Manson called it a traveling commute. He preached from the driver's seat and around the campfires when they would stop. He convinced his followers that they were purging themselves of their egos, stripping away the conditioning of a wrong and bad society, and becoming something new and someone free. New members joined and the numbers kept going. Eventually it was decided that they needed to find somewhere more permanent to stay, somewhere outside of the city, somewhere that had enough space for all of them. And they found an area in the hills of northwest LA, about 30 minutes away from downtown. It was called Span Ranch, and the family moved in and they made it their own. It was an old movie set, so there were a lot of old movie set buildings, bunkhouses, outbuildings, a barn. They found old buggies for transportation. They ran electrical wires and set up a kitchen. They made themselves right at home. Charles Manson, throughout it all, continuing to preach his quote-unquote teachings, and in true cult leader fashion, that included telling his followers that the apocalypse was coming, because of course it was. He described the isolated place in which they were living in as the place where they would wait out the end of the world. He preached that all men, including himself, were both Jesus and the devil all in one. He assigned roles and built loyalty through a system of total psychological dependence, controlling all access to food, to sleep, to the outside world. And if you know anything about the Charles Manson story, you know that this loyalty that he grew to have from his followers eventually led to senseless murders. But to understand why exactly Charles Manson ordered the murders of 7 people to happen on 2 separate nights in August of 1969, you first have to understand what he believed, or what he told his followers he believed. In late 1968, the Beatles released their double album. Charles Manson listened to this obsessively, and in his mind, the album, the lyrics of the songs were a message, specifically a message to him. He told his followers that the Beatles were prophets, and that lyrics of their songs described a coming apocalypse that he called Helter Skelter after a song on the album. For whatever reason, even though the song was written about an amusement park ride, the Manson family was absolutely convinced that it was about a race war, meaning that in Manson's mind, or at least what he claimed, was that the apocalypse would happen and take form in the form of a race war. And he said that the violence that came with it would be total and civilization ending. The family, meanwhile, would be safe though, of course, because they would retreat into this underground city underneath the desert, and they would go there to wait out the war. When it was over, the survivors would emerge, and Charles Manson would then be the leader of the new world. The problem, by the summer of 1969, was that Helter Skelter was not starting on its own. The war that Charles Manson had predicted and told all of his followers about was not happening, and he was getting really frustrated about this because he had this timeline in mind, and the war not happening was not in line with his schedule. So he told his followers that they would have to show them how it was done. The family would have to start the war themselves by committing murders so horrifying and provocative that they would be the start of the conflict that Manson was convinced was inevitable. He told his family members that they were going to need to commit the crimes and that he would be waiting underground, ready to rule. That was the theory that he successfully sold to Tex, Susan, Patricia, and Linda. And once Charles Manson announced that it was time, on August 8th, they all headed down towards Cielo Drive to do what they were told. When the group got there, Tex Watson climbed up on the telephone pole at the gate and cut the phone lines. He then helped the others jump over the fence. They climbed into a house through a window, which is when Tex then announced, quote, "I am the devil and I've come to do the devil's business." And they attacked, and they did not hold back. Inside the main house, Sharon Tate, the woman who lived there with her husband, was spending the evening with some friends. She was 26 years old and 8.5 months pregnant with her first child. That night, her husband Roman wasn't home because he was away in London for work. So it was Sharon and 3 of her closest friends, 32-year-old Wojciech, 35-year-old Jay, and 25-year-old Abigail. It was supposed to be an ordinary night. But when Tex cut out the screen and entered through the window while the others followed behind him, what followed was an act of violence so extreme that I can't even go into the details of it. By the end of the night, there were 5 victims, everyone who once had been inside of that house, as well as 18-year-old Stephen Parent. Stephen was a friend of William. William was the caretaker of the house who had been staying in the guest house. In the middle of the chaos, Stephen pulled in his car to go and see William in the guest house, but before he could even get out of his car, while still in the driveway, the group saw his headlights. Minutes after that, Stephen Parent had become the 5th victim, still in his car, still in the driveway. driveway. The group then got rid of their clothing, put on the change of clothes that they had, went back to the ranch, and went to bed. By the following morning, all of them had gone a great night's sleep. They were all well rested. They had all slept in. Then they all gathered together again to have their morning coffee. They turned on the news. Of course, the brutal murders were all over the news, and all of those who had committed the murders, oh, they were so proud. They were proud and they were happy and full of joy that their murders were so brutal and so unexpected that they had made the morning news. But Charles Manson, well, he was not happy. He was not satisfied. He told his followers that they had been sloppy with the murders, way too messy. He told them that he would come along with them the following night and showed them how it was done. And he did. On the night of August 9th, the group was larger. It was the same group who had committed the murders the night prior, but now along with Manson and 2 other family members. They made their way to a random house, which was a home of 44-year-old Lino LeBlanca, a wealthy supermarket chain executive, and his wife, 28-year-old Rosemary. Charles Manson initially went inside of the home alone. He tied up Lino and Rosemary LeBlanca, and he told them not to worry, that they would not be harmed. He then robbed the entire house. And then he went back to the car to let his followers know that the victims were ready, that he had tied them up and told them to now go inside and end them. And that is exactly what they did. For weeks, the connection between those 2 murders were not made. I mean, people in the area were absolutely terrified, but authorities were so confused because both crime scenes felt so random. The break in the case did not come from the Tate LaBianca investigation at all, but from a different case entirely, because in late October of 1969, law enforcement raided Span Ranch on suspicion of vehicle theft, so nothing in connections to the murders at all, but Charles Manson, along with dozens of family members, were then arrested. Manson was in custody, but not yet charged with murder. One of those arrested also was Susan Atkins, and Susan was actually already facing charges in a separate case, the murder of Gary Hinman. Gary Hinman was a music teacher and an acquaintance of the family who had been killed on July 27th, 1969, when Charles Manson ordered for him to be. So yeah, these 2 murders that I just told you about, they were not the first. Gary's was another horrible, horrible murder, and that is what Susan Atkins was already facing charges for. While she was in jail on those charges, Susan then began talking, and she spoke a little too much to too many of her cellmates about too many of her crimes. And by November of 1969, the LA Police Department had officially enough to connect the murders to the Manson family. On December 1st, 1969, arrest warrants were issued, and on December 8th, Charles Manson was finally charged with 7 counts of first-degree murder. The trial of Manson, Susan, Patricia, and Leslie combined for both the Tate and LaBianca murders began on June 15th, 1970, and became one of the most extraordinary courtroom spectacles in American legal history. It lasted 9.5 months. Manson's behavior during that trial was shocking, to say the least. He turned that courtroom into a stage for his own entertainment. Ultimately, Linda Kazabanian, the driver on both nights of the murders, became the key witness for the prosecution, and she was granted immunity in exchange for her testimony. Charles Manson, Susan Atkins, Patricia Krenwinkel, Leslie Van Houten were all found guilty and sentenced to death. Tex Watson was tried separately and convicted in October of 1971. He was also sentenced to death. However, in 1972, the California Supreme Court ruled in a separate case that the death penalty then applied in California was unconstitutional, and all death sentences in the state were automatically then changed to life in prison. Charles Manson spent the remaining 46 years of his life in California prisons. He was denied parole 12 times. He gave interviews to journalists, authors, and television programs, and he continued to try and make every single little thing about him. He remained, in the eyes of the public, the most recognizable symbol of evil in modern American history. And at 83 years old in November of 2017, Charles Manson was pronounced deceased while still in custody. The cause of death was cardiac arrest. Susan Atkins passed in prison as well in 2009 from cancer. She was 61 years old. Patricia and Tex to this day remain incarcerated, and Leslie, the youngest, was denied parole 22 times before finally being released on parole in July 11th of 2023 after more than 53 years in prison. Yeah, I'll give you a second to digest that because I know that was a lot, but anyway, that is it for me today. Let me know your thoughts. And yeah, thank you for spending time with me today. Hope you guys are having the best day. If not, go do something to make it the best day. Make somebody happy, and I will see you in my next video. Massive kiss on the forehead to every single one of you.